How's everybody enjoying lunch? This is great. It's great to see so many people that have returned for lunch, that stuck around. It speaks to the real quality of the program. My name is Jeff Poulos. I am the Executive Director of Associated Grantmakers, and we are honored to be a partner for the third year in a row on this program. Although I have to say, when I heard the title, Unleashing the Power of Local Philanthropy, I half expected to see people running around in capes and superhero outfits, insignia on them. I'm glad to see most of you didn't come in your alter ego costumes. So, actually, the real superhero here is Northeastern University. And I just want to give a special shout out to Rebecca and your team here. You guys are really, please. You're leading the way by inspiring and educating the future leaders of our community about responsible philanthropy. By bringing together nonprofit and foundation leaders, policymakers, people from the business community, academic community, experienced professionals, and students, you are helping to unleash our inner superheroes. So thank you for that. A really special program that the MOOC that you're doing is unique in the world, and if you haven't, I know she gave the new URL, if you haven't had an opportunity to look into it, I highly encourage you to do that. So I just want to say on behalf of Associate Grantmakers, we and the foundation community, we are especially pleased to be part of this program. As you can see, as evidenced this morning from the two panels that you've already heard from and in the afternoon sessions, philanthropy is here, we're present, we're trying to do our part, but we do it through collaboration. The key word today does seem to be partnerships and collaborations, and it is essential work that we cannot do alone. The community, the philanthropic community, a very broad and diverse community, is only as strong as it's the communities that it serves. So we encourage all of us to keep this dialogue going through collaboration and partnership. I've been sitting over at my table, and I've looked around the room and seen a bunch of us with our heads down in our laps. And for those of you that are on panels and that are speaking, know that we are mad tweeting about today's program. We'll remind you the hashtag and the handle here. I encourage you to mad tweet along with me. It's been fun, and it's a way to both give visibility to these great initiatives and to this conference and to your own organization as well. So I encourage it. So at this time, I'm delighted to introduce our luncheon speaker, Orson Watson. You'll read his bio in the program there. He is an advisor to the Garfield Foundation and a board member of Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities. The Garfield Foundation's work in community revitalization focuses on business and economic development, physical development, and human capital. And the foundation leverages resources in a very highly and strategic way to catalyze change. And so we're excited to hear from Orson more about that work. So please join me in welcoming Orson Watson to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I know you would rather probably stay here speaking to each other because a lunchtime speaker is always a weird thing, but I'm going to try to make it as interesting as possible, and also I'm going to try to leave a lot of room for everybody to ask questions and get some discussion so no one falls asleep after their lunch. So as Jeff said, I'm a program officer for community revitalization at the Garfield Foundation. So I'm saying this mostly to students in the room. Like most people in philanthropy, I got to philanthropy completely by accident. And like most people in philanthropy, I have been figuring it out as I go along, which is what makes the whole thing so exciting. When I tell people what I do, and tell people that, oh, I give away money for a living, I get that sort of smirk. Notice the sort of smirk on people's faces. It says both two things, like, why don't you get a real job, and how hard could that possibly be? I think at one point when I
Sure.
entered philanthropy,
Sure.
when I was working
Sure.
in a nonprofit, I was of the opinion that working in philanthropy simply involved skipping around and cutting checks to people. That actually happened once when I remember when I digress, but in the last nonprofit I worked for, a woman showed up at our office unannounced with her friend slash hairdresser, and they stayed all afternoon, and we thought she was a nut and wouldn't leave, but she ended up being a kitty litter heiress, and she left us this really big check. So in general, God bless her, that doesn't work that way now because there's been a lot of money spent on very expensive strategic philanthropic advisory consultants. And so generally, the entire field of philanthropy is a growth sector, so is philanthropic advising. So what you're seeing are a lot of things that are changing constantly. There's a lot of strategic planning, a lot of changes in theory, a lot of modifications of theories of change. I think about 10 years ago when I entered this field, foundations went through strategic planning roughly every 7 years. Now it's about every 2 years. So it's a lot to keep up with. So when I was asked to speak about how local funders can maximize their impact, the best I can do is tell you what we have been doing at the Garfield Foundation and give you some of the lessons learned. So basically my talk today, I'm going to start by explaining my portfolio, explaining our particular funder and funding niche, and present you with roughly about 5 lessons that we have learned moving forward. And then given the audience, I would like to leave a lot of room for discussion and questions going forward. So about the Garfield Foundation. So the Garfield Foundation is a small foundation, and basically the money we give can be divided up into thirds. 2/3 of the money that we give away is in the environmental field, 1/3 is in the community revitalization field. Why is it divided up into thirds? We have 3 trustees, and that actually represents the interest of the 3 trustees. When we find something, and I manage the community revitalization portfolio, and when I find something in community revitalization that manages to cross over into an environmental area, it ends up being a real home run for all 3 of my trustees, and we sort of seek them out, such as things like smart growth and urban sustainability. Our community revitalization theory of change is one in which we believe that community revitalization in low-income communities cannot be fully achieved unless they are accompanied by efforts to build a vibrant local business and commercial sector that can generate jobs, income, and wealth for residents of distressed communities. We utilize a commercial lever, the support of initiatives that seek to create and or revitalize healthy local markets, develop businesses, and engage the private sector. We came to the whole area of, well, originally it was called older industrial cities, but here in Massachusetts, there's been many names for it. Legacy cities, older industrial, and now here in Massachusetts, they're called gateway cities. The way that we came to this was, again, with our trustees, we had a geographic interest in 2 states, particularly, Massachusetts and New Jersey. And if you look at the cities in Massachusetts and New Jersey, with the exception of Boston, all of those cities are considered older industrial. In addition, we have although we are really a virtual foundation, most of us work from home in different parts of the country, we also have an administrative office which is the official headquarters of our foundation, which is actually located in New Bedford, which is an older industrial city. But I have to say that we had been located in New Bedford for several years before we decided to start making grants there. And we didn't start to make grants in New Bedford until certain criteria were met, which I will talk about as we move forward. I would also say that our decision to focus on older industrial cities was roughly around 2007, 2008, sort of dovetailed off of the works that were coming out of the Brookings Institution and the American Assembly on the revitalization of older industrial and legacy cities. And also that was around the time that the whole initiative to rescue Detroit and Cleveland came about. So we were able to sort of join a lot of working groups and be able to learn about this field as it was actually starting to emerge. Given the size of our endowment and given the things that we want to do, we have no choice but to be highly strategic in our grant making as opposed to being charitable. And in the approach that we try to use in our community revitalization grant making is we try to balance funding for place with funding for innovation. We are willing to focus on certain places that meet certain criteria, and we attempt to fund innovation through the support of national best practices wherever they may be that might have some relevance in the places that we care about. So if you were to look at our CR portfolio, what you see are, grants that are concentrated in certain places, and then these sort of, they might, to some people, they might look like these wildcard projects located all over the country, but what those are focused on are some of the innovative practices in the space. So, I'm coming to innovation, and innovation, that has to do with the first lesson. And what we have recognized is there's a really strong need to fund innovation in the space of community revitalization. Why is that? Well, largely as a result of the 2008 recession. In the late 1990s and 2000s, our particular funding niche, I will call it, around business and commercial development became very popular. A lot of it was led by Michael Porter and the Initiative for Competitive Intercity. And what happened in 2008 was a lot of those approaches and a lot of the projects that we were actually funding actually began to hit the skids. What we found, from 2008 to 2011, 2012, was what we were doing. We were actually, a lot of our grantees were using our money really simply to keep the lights on. But in the process, now that the recession is over, one of the things that we're noticing is not only is there a lack of new programs, but we find that the entire field of community revitalization is lacking innovation. And we didn't find a lot of new models did not come online during that period. As the recession ends, you're seeing community revitalization resurgent, but they're basically repackaging some of the same models of 10 years ago. For example, if I have to read yet another report on the evergreen co-op as the be-all and end-all that it's going to solve, that one just tells me that there's got to be some better ideas out there, and we have to try to find them and fund them and get them up to speed. Let me give you, I was told to give you examples, because if I were talking to a group of community revitalization funders, I would mention one example and everybody would know exactly what it is. And I just mentioned Evergreen Co-op, which is very familiar to people in the philanthropic world, which you might not know about. But one of the examples of innovation that we are currently funding has to do with something called the EB-5 program. The EB-5 program is a program run by the Immigration and Naturalization Service that gives green cards to investors who invest $1 million in downtown areas, and they give a green card to investors who invest $500,000 in a low-income census tract. We are funding research and convening around this topic to see whether or not that could be a new source of capital for the revitalization of low-income communities. Within this area of innovation, there are two things that have come up that I think are worth pointing out that came up largely as a result of the recession and says a lot about the issues of partnership, particularly the partnership between government and philanthropy that you've been talking about. One of the things that I noticed started to happen really beginning in 2008 was the federal government, a lot of federal programs started coming up and using the language of innovation, right? If you look at the Department of Labor, the EPA, and HUD, you're seeing all of these programs where they're trying to uncover and fund innovation. So this represents a bit of a paradigm shift, because in the traditional models of the relationship between government and philanthropy, generally our dollars were used to fund innovation, uncover the models, develop the best practices. If they were successful, we would turn them over to the government, who has the much deeper pockets to actually fund the sustainability of the program and even expand them. As an example, for example, in terms of the different volumes of money that we're talking about, the Zuckerberg gift to the Newark Public Schools of $100 million, which the newspapers were all over and everyone was very excited about, really only represents about 10% of the annual school budgets of the city of Newark. So in terms of what philanthropy can do, it's always been relatively limited. So we always see ourselves as almost like this, we have traditionally seen ourselves as the startup funders that will then pass it on to the government. But what's been happening with the government stepping in the innovation space, and through my work with the Funders Network and through my work with some older industrial cities groups where we've been sitting with HUD, is yes, we're really excited that they're wanting to fund innovation, but it raises some questions about, well, are you expecting us to switch roles? It's like, does the government's funding of innovation mean that they're passing it off to us to fund the long-term sustainability of the project? And if so, we simply don't have the resources to do this. We're also seeing this at the local level, where Lisa Wong this morning spoke about the need to fill potholes, right? So what a lot of municipalities have done is they've seen, oh wow, our money is tight, our budgets are being cut. Oh look, philanthropy has all of these flexible dollars, so that while I could use my money for fixing potholes, I could go to philanthropy, and philanthropy could fill in the gaps and help us to provide money for programs that we otherwise might not be able to fund. Yes, these are all great things, but the thing that concerns me the most is that we are not having the discussion of what are the long-term implications of these relationships. What are the roles of philanthropy and government shifting? What are we paying for? How much is it going to cost, and for how long? So I raise this question as something that is emerging in this sort of philanthropy government partnership issue. And these are questions that I think we still need to address, because I think the expectations have not been discussed, and the expectations need to be a bit better aligned. So going back to our funding of innovation, in our funding, what we do is we try to balance our funding of innovation with our funding of place. We actually think of places as laboratories where we can fund the replication of innovative models and best practices that are working in other places. And the innovative approaches that we look for are those that are developing practices that have some resonance to the problems faced by older industrial cities and that have some replication potential. So, through my work in older industrial cities at the national level, I have been through the Rust Belt more times than I would like to admit. One year, I went to 5 different conferences in Detroit. And one of the things that tells me when I come home is, in Massachusetts, we're not in such bad shape, and in Boston in particular. If you look at Boston, Boston is a place with a highly educated population, high concentrations of wealth, very creative, community-based organizations that are constantly innovating. And one of the things that I look at Boston as, Boston is a great shopping mall for best practices around community revitalization. So therefore, we end up doing a lot of funding in Boston, and we end up funding projects that we then asked to, well, you did this so well in Boston, why don't you go to either New Bedford, or why don't you take this to Newark? Because the Boston had the luxury of developing the practice. Lesson 2 is around older industrial cities themselves, and I have to point out that although the need is great for older industrial and gateway cities in the state of Massachusetts and across the country, revitalizing older industrial cities is a zero-sum game. The current flow of national public and private philanthropic sources to save Detroit, for example, raises questions about whether there will be enough money left over to save the equally needy nearby cities of Flint, Gary, Indiana, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. So this leads us to an issue whereby, since we cannot save everybody, it leads us to conclusion that we actually have to be in the business of actually picking winners. which is something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but we do have limited resources, and you see a lot of foundations preface certain cities over others, and we are actually picking winners. When it goes to the issue of, well, how do we pick winners? So this is my lesson number 3. We look for game changers. Our objective is not to spread our resources so thinly that they touch everyone. Instead, we focus on identifying game-changing or catalytic events around which our resources can be joined with others in a strategic direction to shift the narrative of older industrial city decline. What are game-changers or catalytic investments or events? It's kind of hard for me to find them, except to say you know them when you see them. Game changers are the events that either bring in the cavalry or signal that the cavalry is about to mount their horses. Game changers can come from any sector. They can come from government, nonprofit, education, private sector, or even an act of God. Game changers are not just a spark of new interest in a place, but they also indicate a coming flow of new public dollars, private sector investment, and even philanthropic interests in a place that where it otherwise might not have been. So, for example, as an act of God game changers, hurricanes are big game changers. The hurricanes were big game changers in terms of sparking interest in New Orleans and even in Springfield here in Massachusetts. It caused a lot of interest, it caused a lot of media attention, and it caused the coalescence of various stakeholders to try to do something and move some of the issues forward. Another game changer in our work in Newark, the election of Cory Booker was a game changer. Newark, which I grew up in New York City, and Newark was simply a place that you did not ever want to go. One of the issues with Cory Booker coming in was Cory Booker signaled to Wall Street that Newark was back on the rise. As a result of Cory Booker's election, a lot of investors and developers started taking another look at the city. A lot of foundations started coming back. And so we saw that as an opportunity, and as an opportunity, we came in with other foundations, and we started investing in certain things, which I will tell you about. Another example is Cape Wind in New Bedford. Cape Wind, which we many years ago nicknamed the Big Dib of New Bedford. It represents a tremendous investment shot in the arm for the South Coast. If it gets built, it will have a tremendous impact on job creation and local supply chain businesses. We saw this as an opportunity to make investments to get the workforce system aligned and the business supply chain aligned so that they could actually benefit from the big dollars, big investments that are coming in. I could keep going on with different examples of the different types of game changers that we recognize. But our goal with regard to game changers is to ask how much money is coming in, where is it going to be spent, how many jobs are being created, and who will get those jobs, and what are the potential benefits to the local supply chain businesses. We try to make investments that position local institutions so that they can maximize the return to local citizens and businesses of the game-changing event. And we try to build structures and create institutional alignment so that when the dollars stop flowing, there is something left that is sustainable and elevates the place. So in reality, it is a little bit opportunistic, but if we see something like this coming, we quickly try to do something to align all of the stakeholders on the ground so that they can get the most out of it. Lesson 4 that we've learned is which is very much in keeping with the topics of this meeting and some of the previous panels that you were talking about, that discussions in the previous panels, is we seek alignment of the interests of local stakeholders relevant to the game changer. In some of the places, the relationships between funding constituencies, particularly government and local philanthropies, are highly contentious. Shortage of resources breeds contempt, and I've seen this in a lot of places. For example, you go to some older industrial cities, and because the nonprofits have been dealing with a shortage of resources, they're constantly tearing each other down. They're like, oh, don't fund him. That's a terrible organization. Give me the money. Likewise, you see contentious relationships between the nonprofits and the city, or contentious relationships between the city and philanthropy. No one is on the same page. Everybody is working in their own best interest, which is completely understandable. So one of the things that we try to do is to try to build some across-the-board alignment of stakeholders, and which hopefully leads to an alignment of the system so that everything in this place, or most things in the place, or the systems in this place, are better aligned so that they can receive the benefits of the game-changing event. How do you do this? Okay, the way that we do this, well, of course, we fund convening, we fund systems change analysis, we fund stakeholder meetings. You know, it's all about creating a table where you can bring the various parties in and get them to discuss and get them to sort of possibly all get on the same page, make them recognize that all boats rise, and get them all working in at least a positive direction. But with this, I will give a warning. Coming from philanthropy, I personally feel that this can get very dangerous, because our currency in philanthropy is meetings and convenings. And because of this, we can have a tendency to make meetings and convenings an end in themselves, where the outcome becomes the meeting, the outcomes become the networking, and it leads to something what I jokingly refer to as, sitting at the Ritz-Carlton and discussing the problems of the poor. Convening and stakeholder engagement is also incredibly expensive. And in the long run, if you do not have a specific outcome, not related to the actual in the meeting and the convening, but related to the problem that you were convening to address, and you'd be amazed how often that gets lost, then you're just spending money. That in other words, in my preference, I start, when I grant make, I always do I call it the cut the check equation. At a certain point, when I'm looking at a project that's very, very, very complex, and say it's a very complex workforce project that's going to involve all sorts of stakeholder convenings and and at the very end, it's going to produce jobs for 30 people. I do a back-of-the-envelope calculation and say, would it simply be cheaper to give each of those 30 people a check? And you would be surprised how many projects fail that task. Not that there isn't a role for stakeholder convening, and not there isn't a role for looking at systems, but I put in the caveat and the warning, watch the costs and make sure that when you are bringing all these people together, you remain true to the outcome, and always go back and check whether or not you're meeting that outcome. The last lesson is around what is one of the purposes of sort of looking at the game changer and looking at the work that we do in older industrial cities is what we ultimately are trying to do is we're trying to rebrand the place as opposed to rebrand it from a place of decline to a place of opportunity. Our resources are limited, so therefore one of our objectives is not just to take our money, but to take the money of much bigger foundations who are our friends and are in our network, and bring them to the place that we are interested in, that we've identified as a place that is worth them investing. All of the national funders have places that they care about. If you go through the websites of some of the big foundations, go through Casey, Rockefeller, Ford, you're going to see these certain places listed as, so Ford Foundation and the Kresge Foundation are going to rescue Detroit. And from a talk that Darren Walker gave in Boston about a month ago, it seems like they're even going to be even more so about saving Detroit. But if you go through the websites of various foundations, you're going to see that they care about certain places, and those are the places where their investments are made, and they have priority for those places. One of our goals is to take the places that we care about, like a place like New Bedford, and get New Bedford listed within the places of much larger foundations. In so doing, you're moving it from a negative space to a positive space. You're positioning it in a place where they can attract greater resources, and you're positioning the place for some positive change. In closing, I would like to say, and I'm closing quickly because I'd like to get to some discussion. In closing, I would like to tell you that every single strategy that we work on is perfect. Work completely well. Everything is going just fine. And if you believe that, there's a bridge in Brooklyn that I'd like you to sell. One of the things that I want to close with is that funders are like pack rats. We like shiny new things. We're always after the new idea. We're always after the new silver bullet. Okay, it's not a good thing, but if you understand that, you realize that the opportunity is created by an organization's ability to recognize and take advantage of that situation. The other issue that I want to point out is if you are a nonprofit, and some of you are students, so you're going to go work for nonprofits. Okay, so I jokingly said that everything that we fund actually works and our strategy actually works. Okay, everybody knows that's not true. However, we have sort of a built-in level of dishonesty within philanthropy around not just don't we like to admit when things don't work, but we don't share when things work. In fact, I'm telling tales out of school, but one of the things I learned in philanthropy is if a program officer says to you, boy, I've got a great program for you to fund, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great program for you to fund. It might mean they're trying to get out of a lousy program and they can't get out unless they can talk you into funding it. So I encourage you that as you go into nonprofits and as you go into philanthropy, if something doesn't work, tell your funder. And tell your funder if something doesn't work so that we don't keep investing in the same mistakes over and over again, and we actually end up moving the field forward. Thank you. Oh, any questions? Jeff?
So thank you so much for starting this conversation. And I wonder, you briefly touched on the expectations of philanthropy and government sort of collaborating, but the challenges of that still haven't been discussed about as philanthropy comes in to help support something and perhaps can't fill the entire gap that's there. Maybe you could shed a little light about any of the discussions that Garfield Foundation has had internally just about how to address that conversation, how to approach it with government so that we can ensure that people are working towards being on the same page.
So I actually don't think that's a conversation you have at the individual foundation level. I think that's a conversation that you actually have to have at the levels within the groups, and there are a number of groups that are engaged in philanthropy government partnership. I'm actually co-chair of a group that is a philanthropy Federal Reserve group. I actually think that I think that we're due for that conversation because originally when that issue started emerging, within the context of the recession, we were so happy that government was trying to engage us, and we were so happy that we might have an opportunity to influence the way that government spent its money, but. There were expectations. The expectations didn't exactly align, and in many respects, in a couple of partnerships that I participated in, where we went in saying, "Oh, we're going to get to influence the way that the Obama administration gives money to X." One of the things that came out was no. They had already set the agenda, and they were simply looking for us to come along. I think we've become a little more sophisticated, and we have a little more experience around these kind of partnerships. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. Question?
Hi.
Yeah. Oh, hi.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to ask the question around the evaluation when you are actually awarding grants, when you talked about innovation and ideas like that are coming down the pipe. So how do you evaluate, or what are some criteria that you have for a plan of something that may have never happened before? It may be something that's completely brand new, very innovative. How do you say, okay, is this a realistic thing? Is this thing really going to give me a good measurable outcome? All right.
Okay, to that question, I've been asked this question before, and to that question I'm going to say, good ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Anyone can come up with a spectacular idea. Ultimately, what I end up looking at is who is trying this idea. Because ultimately, trying a new idea, particularly in a field like community revitalization, is tantamount to rolling a very large boulder up a very steep hill, and you could still end up getting run over by it. And one of the things that I'm looking for is that the person has the fortitude to try to stick with it. So, of course, there are other things like you want to make sure that they're not a financial mess. You want to, I mean, there's all these other things. But in reality, philanthropic investments, like any investments, are investments in people. Yes?
You noted that funders don't share even with each other about their mistakes. How do we change the culture, not only within the funding community, but outside of the funding community, to take what you kind of know behind closed doors and let it inform future program development or future ideas?
So, there are built-in reasons why that doesn't happen, right? Because, you've actually one of the best examples of this was I was at a conference that the Philadelphia Fed gives on urban revitalization. I think they do it every 2 years. And 2 years ago, the new president of the Casey Foundation stood on a stage with 3 other foundation presidents and declared that Making Connections, which was a $40 million 10-year initiative, was a strategic mistake. And there was literally a gasp in the room. And not only was there a gasp in the room, but afterwards everyone was like, wow, that was incredibly brave. I actually think what needs to happen, it actually needs to happen at the foundation leadership level, because what we're doing, we're kind of like in the startup business. We're trying stuff that has never been tried. It can't all work. I think we need to build that into the expectations of foundation presidents that, what we do is not always going to work, and it's okay and we are going, not is that okay to make mistakes, we are going to make mistakes, and when we make mistakes, we're going to share them widely. I think that, as you point to, that's a big cultural shift that actually needs to happen. Yes?
I actually got the microphone this time. Hi, I'm Andrea Atkinson. I'm with the Scopa Group, and I do strategic planning and community building. And I think I've seen the trend of innovation really coming around in a lot of different fields. And I think there's a danger in funding innovation and not funding models that currently work, and always looking for something new and shiny and, and fun. How do you balance that in your funding?
Okay, so if you look at the models that currently work, there are models that currently work, and I think you have to distinguish models that currently work from boutique models, and there are a lot of boutique models out there. And by boutique models, I mean, there are some models out there that are just they run perfectly. I'm not going to say the names of them, but they run perfectly. But if you look at them, they're very expensive. A lot of times they're driven by the fundraising prowess of their founder, and hence they're not replicable. And yes, it's really nice to say, oh, this project works so well, and it's got this gleaming building, and it's got all of this A, B, C, and D. But if it's not replicable, then I'm just funding a boutique. I actually would put back. I actually think that yes, we do try to strike a balance in finding things that work. And they're not going to work perfectly. Sometimes they need our resources to work better. But I will say that in the community revitalization field, there is still a lot of room for new models and new innovation, because they're sadly lacking. I'm tired of the same 4 things coming back. Right now, for example, I don't know if you're in our field, the whole anchor institutions are the silver bullet yet again, right? Well, I haven't been in philanthropy that long, but I remember when they were around last time, which was roughly about 10 or 12 years ago, and I'm looking at the literature that's coming out on anchor institutions now, and there's absolutely nothing new to it. They've just recycled something that didn't work the first time. I think it's that sort of the institutional memory and paying attention to what's been done before. At one of our board meetings, for example, one of the consultants of the Garfield Foundation, was bringing up a new approach, and he actually pulled up a document from the Ford Foundation of 40 years ago that was actually saying, this is still a good idea. Look, this was done 40 years ago. I'm not convinced that we've actually tried everything. Okay, thank you.